The night was quiet, too quiet. The streets were empty, and the only sound was the low hum of the truck's engine. The driver, a man in his late 50s, had been on the road for hours. His eyes were heavy, and his body ached from the long drive. He just wanted to finish his shift and go home. But something was about to change everything. As he turned onto a dimly lit street, his headlights caught something unusual. There, next to a dumpster, was a faint glow. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe a reflection from a street lamp. But as he got closer, he realized it was something else entirely. He slowed the truck and pulled over. The glow was coming from inside the dumpster. It was soft, almost like a pulse, and it seemed to be calling to him. He turned off the engine and stepped out of the truck. The air was cold, and the street was eerily silent. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should just get back in the truck and drive away. But curiosity got the better of him. He walked over to the dumpster, his boots crunching on the gravel. The glow grew brighter as he approached. He peered inside, and what he saw made his heart skip a beat. There, among the trash, was a strange object. It was small, about the size of a football, and it was covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them. The glow was coming from within, pulsing like a heartbeat. He reached out to touch it, but as soon as his fingers brushed against the surface, the object lit up even brighter. A low hum filled the air, and the patterns on the object began to move faster. He pulled his hand back, startled, but the object didn't stop. It started to rise out of the dumpster, floating in midair. The driver stumbled back, his mind racing. What was this thing? Where did it come from? And why was it here, in a dumpster on a quiet street? He felt a mix of fear and wonder, unsure of what to do next. But before he could make a decision, the object suddenly shot out a beam of light, projecting a holographic image into the air. The image was blurry at first, but then it cleared, revealing a scene that made the driver's blood run cold. It was a planet, but not like Earth. The sky was a deep red, and the ground was cracked and barren. In the distance, he could see strange structures, like buildings, but they were crumbling and broken. And then he saw them, figures, humanoid but not quite human. They were looking up at the sky, their faces filled with fear and desperation. The driver couldn't understand what he was seeing, but he felt a deep sense of unease. The hologram flickered, and then a voice filled the air. It was soft and melodic, but the words were in a language he couldn't understand. The voice grew more urgent, and the figures in the hologram began to fade. The driver realized, with a sinking feeling, that this was a message. A plea for help. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the hologram disappeared. The object fell to the ground, the glow fading to a dim pulse. The driver stood there, frozen, his mind racing. What had he just witnessed? And what was he supposed to do now? He looked around, half expecting someone to appear and explain what was going on. But the street was still empty, the only sound the distant hum of the city. He knew he couldn't just leave the object there. But taking it with him felt like stepping into a world he wasn't ready for. With a deep breath, he picked up the object. It was warm to the touch, and the patterns on its surface seemed to shift under his fingers. He placed it carefully in the passenger seat of his truck and got back behind the wheel. His hands were shaking as he started the engine. As he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed forever. The object sat beside him, silent now, but he knew it was only the beginning. Whatever this thing was, it had chosen him. And he had no idea what was coming next. The truck rumbled down the empty road, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking the silence. The driver kept glancing at the object on the passenger seat, its faint glow casting strange shadows in the cab. His mind was a whirlwind of questions. What was this thing? Where had it come from? And why had it chosen him? He couldn't shake the image of the hologram, the red sky, the crumbling buildings, the desperate figures. It felt like a scene from a movie, but he knew it was real. The object was real. And now, it was in his truck, his responsibility. He drove for a while, unsure of where to go. He couldn't take it home. What if it was dangerous? He couldn't go to the police. What would he even say? I found a glowing alien thing in a dumpster. They'd think he was crazy. For now, he decided to keep driving, to think. After a while, he pulled into a quiet rest area. It was deserted, just a few dim lights and a couple of empty picnic tables. He parked the truck and turned off the engine. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets. He took a deep breath and picked up the object. It was lighter than he expected, and the surface felt smooth but warm, like it was alive. The patterns on its surface still shifted, almost like they were reacting to his touch. He turned it over in his hands, examining it closely. There were no seams, no buttons, no obvious way to open it. It was just a solid, glowing sphere with those strange, moving patterns. He set it down on the dashboard and leaned back in his seat, staring at it. "What are you?" he muttered under his breath. As if in response, the object suddenly lit up again. The glow intensified, and the patterns began to move faster. The driver's heart raced as the hologram reappeared, floating in the air in front of him. This time, the image was clearer. He could see the figures more distinctly. Tall, slender beings with large, expressive eyes. They were standing in what looked like a ruined city, their faces filled with sorrow. The voice returned, soft and melodic, but still in that unknown language. The driver listened intently, trying to make sense of it. The tone was urgent, pleading. He couldn't understand the words, but he could feel the emotion behind them. These beings were asking for help. The hologram shifted, showing a new scene. This time, it was a diagram, a map, maybe? There were lines and symbols, and in the center, a glowing dot. The driver squinted, trying to figure out what it meant. Was it a location? A destination? Before he could process it, the hologram changed again. Now it showed a planet, Earth. The image zoomed in, focusing on a specific area. The driver recognized it immediately. It was his city. The hologram highlighted a spot, a building he knew well. It was an old, abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. The driver's breath caught in his throat. What did this mean? Was the object telling him to go there? Or was it warning him about something? The hologram flickered and disappeared, leaving the cab in darkness once more. The driver sat there, his mind racing. He looked at the object, now dim and silent again. It had given him a message, but he didn't fully understand it. All he knew was that it was pointing him toward that factory. He started the truck and pulled out of the rest area. His hands were steady now, his mind made up. He had to go to the factory. He had to find out what this was all about. As he drove, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of purpose. For years, his life had been routine: drive, work, sleep, repeat. But now, everything had changed. This object, this mystery, had given him a mission. And for the first time in a long time, he felt alive. The factory wasn't far. He reached it in about 20 minutes, pulling up to the chain-link fence that surrounded the property. The place had been abandoned for years, and it looked it. The windows were broken, the walls covered in graffiti. The gate was padlocked, but the driver knew a way in. He parked the truck and grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment. He hesitated for a moment, looking at the object on the passenger seat. Should he take it with him? It felt risky, but leaving it in the truck felt even riskier. He picked it up and slipped it into his jacket pocket. It was warm against his side, a constant reminder of its presence. He climbed out of the truck and made his way to a gap in the fence. He squeezed through, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The factory loomed ahead, its silhouette ominous against the night sky. He took a deep breath and started walking. Inside, the factory was a maze of rusted machinery and crumbling walls. The beam of his flashlight danced across the floor as he moved cautiously, trying to avoid tripping over debris. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he felt drawn forward, like the object was guiding him. Finally, he reached a large open area, what must have been the main floor of the factory. In the center of the room was a strange sight, a circle of metal panels, arranged in a perfect ring. They looked out of place, too clean, too new compared to the rest of the decaying building. The driver approached cautiously, his flashlight illuminating the panels. They were covered in symbols, similar to the ones on the object. As he got closer, the object in his pocket began to glow brighter. He pulled it out and held it in his hand. The patterns on its surface were moving faster now, almost like they were excited. He stepped into the circle, and suddenly, the room came alive. The panels lit up, the symbols glowing with the same soft light as the object. The air around him seemed to hum with energy. He felt a strange pull, like the ground beneath him was shifting. And then, without warning, the light intensified, blinding him. He felt a rush of wind, a sensation of falling. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for whatever was coming next. When he opened them again, he was no longer in the factory. When the driver opened his eyes, he was no longer in the factory. He was standing in a vast, open space, but it wasn't like anything he had ever seen before. The ground beneath his feet was smooth and metallic, reflecting a soft, golden light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The air was warm, and there was a faint, sweet smell, like flowers blooming in the spring. He looked around, his heart pounding. The space was enormous, with towering walls that curved upward, disappearing into a glowing haze above. Strange symbols, similar to the ones on the object and the factory panels, were etched into the walls, pulsing gently with light. In the distance, he could see structures, buildings, maybe, but they were unlike anything on Earth. They were sleek and organic, as if they had grown rather than been built. The driver took a step forward, his boots clicking against the metallic floor. The sound echoed, bouncing off the walls and filling the space. He felt a mix of awe and fear. Where was he? And how had he gotten here? Before he could process it, a voice filled the air. It was the same voice he had heard in the truck, soft, melodic, and filled with emotion. But this time, he could understand the words. "Welcome," the voice said. "We have been waiting for you." The driver spun around, looking for the source of the voice, but there was no one there. "Who are you?" he called out, his voice trembling. "Where am I?" "You are in a place between worlds," the voice replied. "A place where time and space are not as you know them. We brought you here because we need your help." The driver's mind raced. "Who's we? What do you want from me?" The voice paused, as if considering how to explain. "We are the last of our kind," it said finally. "Our world is dying, and we cannot save it alone. We sent the device to your world in the hope that someone would find it, someone who could help us." The driver looked down at the object in his hand. It was glowing brighter now, the patterns on its surface swirling like liquid light. "Why me?" he asked. "I'm just a truck driver. I don't know anything about this." "You were chosen because of your kindness," the voice said. "Because you have a good heart. The device responds to those who are willing to help others, even when it is difficult." The driver felt a lump in his throat. He had always tried to do the right thing, but he had never thought of himself as special. "What do you need me to do?" he asked quietly. The voice grew more urgent. "Our world is under threat from a force we cannot defeat alone. It is a darkness that consumes everything in its path. If it is not stopped, it will come to your world next. We need you to help us send a message, a warning to your people. Together, We may be able to stop this darkness before it is too late. The driver's heart sank. This was bigger than he had imagined. How can I help? He asked. I don't even know where to start. The device will guide you, the voice said. It contains the knowledge you need. But you must act quickly. Time is running out. The driver nodded, though he still felt overwhelmed. I'll do what I can, he said. But I need to know more. Who are you? What is this place? The voice softened. We are the Illyrians, it said. This place is a sanctuary, a bridge between our world and yours. It is a place of hope, but also of sorrow. We have lost so much, but we believe there is still a chance to save what remains. The driver felt a deep sadness as he listened. These beings, the Illyrians, had been through so much. And now, they were reaching out to him, a stranger, for help. He didn't know if he could do what they were asking, but he knew he had to try. What happens now? He asked. You must return to your world, the voice said. The device will show you the way. But remember, you are not alone. We will be with you, guiding you every step of the way. The driver took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Okay, he said. I'll do it. As soon as the words left his mouth, the space around him began to shift. The golden light grew brighter, and he felt that same rush of wind, that same sensation of falling. He closed his eyes, bracing himself. When he opened them again, he was back in the factory, standing in the circle of metal panels. The object in his hand was glowing softly, and the symbols on the panels were still lit up. But the air was still, and the hum of energy was gone. The driver looked around, his mind reeling. Had it all been real? Or had he imagined it? But the object in his hand was proof enough. It was real. And so was the mission he had been given. He slipped the object back into his pocket and made his way out of the factory. The night air was cool against his skin, and the stars above seemed brighter than before. He felt a strange sense of purpose, a determination he hadn't felt in years. As he drove back to the city, his mind was already racing with plans. He didn't know how he was going to do it, but he knew he had to try. The Illyrians were counting on him. And maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. The driver's mind was still spinning as he drove back into the city. The encounter with the Illyrians had left him with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear, he had a mission now. He didn't know how he was going to warn the world about the coming danger, but he knew he had to try. As he approached the outskirts of the city, he noticed something strange. A black SUV was following him. At first, he thought it was just a coincidence, but when he turned onto a side street, the SUV turned too. His heart began to race. Who were they? And what did they want? He tried to stay calm, telling himself he was just being paranoid. But when the SUV sped up, closing the distance between them, he knew he was in trouble. He gripped the steering wheel tighter and pressed down on the gas pedal, weaving through the narrow streets. The SUV stayed right behind him, its headlights glaring in his rearview mirror. He could see two figures inside, their faces shadowed. They didn't look like police or government agents. They looked dangerous. The driver's mind raced. What should he do? He couldn't lead them to his home. He couldn't risk putting his family in danger. He needed to lose them, but how? He turned sharply onto a busy main road, hoping the traffic would slow them down. But the SUV stayed close, weaving through the cars with ease. The driver's hands were sweating now, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to think fast. Up ahead, he saw an alley. It was narrow, barely wide enough for his truck, but it was his only chance. He swerved into the alley, the tires screeching as he made the turn. The SUV tried to follow, but it was too big. It slammed into the wall, the sound of crunching metal echoing through the alley. The driver didn't stop. He sped through the alley, his truck bouncing over potholes and debris. When he reached the other end, he turned onto another street and kept driving, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. The SUV was gone, but he knew they wouldn't give up that easily. He drove for a while, taking random turns to make sure he wasn't being followed. Finally, he pulled into a quiet parking lot behind an old diner. He turned off the engine and sat there, trying to catch his breath. What was going on? Who were those people? And how did they know about the object? He reached into his pocket and pulled it out. It was still glowing softly, the patterns on its surface shifting slowly. It felt warm in his hand, almost like it was alive. He stared at it, his mind racing. The Illyrians had said the device would guide him, but it hadn't done much so far. Maybe he needed to figure out how to use it. But how? Before he could think of a plan, he heard a noise outside. He froze, his heart skipping a beat. Slowly, he turned his head and looked out the window. Two figures were approaching the truck, their faces hidden in the shadows. They were dressed in black, and one of them was holding something, a weapon. The driver's blood ran cold. He had to get out of there. He started the engine and slammed the truck into reverse, backing out of the parking spot just as the figures reached the truck. One of them lunged at the door, but the driver hit the gas, and the truck shot backward, knocking the figure to the ground. He shifted into drive and sped out of the parking lot, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. The figures were running after him, but they couldn't keep up. He turned onto the main road and merged into traffic, his heart still pounding. He didn't know where to go. He couldn't go home. He couldn't go to the police. He was on his own, and he had no idea what to do next. But he knew one thing, he couldn't let those people get the object. Whatever it was too important. As he drove, he noticed the object in his hand was glowing brighter. The patterns were moving faster, almost like they were trying to tell him something. He held it up, staring at it. "What are you trying to say?" he muttered. Suddenly, the object projected a small hologram, a map. It showed the city, with a blinking dot marking a location. The driver recognized it immediately. It was the old observatory on the hill outside the city. He had been there once, years ago, with his family. Was the object telling him to go there? It had to be. But why? What was at the observatory? He didn't have time to think about it. The SUV was back, speeding up behind him. He had to make a decision. He could keep running, or he could trust the object and go to the observatory. He took a deep breath and made his choice. He turned the truck toward the hill, pressing down on the gas pedal. The SUV followed, but he didn't care. He had a destination now, and he wasn't going to let anyone stop him. As he drove, the object's glow grew brighter, and the patterns on its surface swirled faster. It was almost like it was excited, like it knew they were getting closer to something important. The driver didn't know what he would find at the observatory, but he knew one thing, this was just the beginning. The chase wasn't over. And neither was his mission. The road to the observatory was steep and winding, lined with tall trees that blocked out the moonlight. The driver gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. The black SUV was still behind him, its headlights cutting through the darkness like twin beams of determination. The object in his pocket was glowing brighter now, its warmth spreading through his jacket. He could feel it pulsing, almost like a heartbeat. It was as if the object knew they were close to their destination, and whatever awaited them there. As he reached the top of the hill, the observatory came into view. It was an old, domed building, its white paint chipped and faded. The parking lot was empty, and the place looked deserted. The driver pulled into the lot and parked near the entrance, his hands trembling as he turned off the engine. He sat there for a moment, listening to the sound of his own breathing. The SUV hadn't followed him up the hill, at least not yet. He knew he didn't have much time. He grabbed the object and climbed out of the truck, the cool night air hitting his face. The observatory's front door was locked, but one of the windows was slightly ajar. He pushed it open and climbed inside, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air inside was musty, and the floor was covered in a thin layer of dust. It was clear no one had been here in a long time. The object's glow grew brighter as he moved through the building, guiding him toward the main observation room. He pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The room was dominated by a large telescope, its lens pointed toward the sky. The walls were lined with old star charts and diagrams, their edges yellowed with age. The driver held up the object, and its light filled the room. The patterns on its surface were moving faster now, almost like they were alive. Suddenly, the object projected another hologram, a star map. It showed a cluster of stars, with one in particular highlighted. The driver recognized it immediately. It was the Illyrian star system. The voice returned, soft and melodic. "You have done well to come this far," it said. "But there is still much to do. The device you hold is a key to saving not just our world, but yours as well." The driver frowned. "How?" he asked. "What do I need to do?" "The device contains a message," the voice explained. "A warning about the darkness that threatens us all. But to send this message, you must activate the observatory's transmitter. It is the only way to reach the stars." The driver looked around the room, his eyes landing on an old control panel near the telescope. It was covered in dust, but the switches and dials were still intact. He walked over to it and began wiping away the dust, his hands shaking. "How do I activate it?" he asked. "The device will guide you," the voice said. "Place it on the control panel, and it will do the rest." The driver hesitated for a moment, then placed the object on the panel. As soon as he did, the patterns on its surface began to shift rapidly, and the control panel came to life. Lights flickered on, and the telescope began to move, its lens adjusting to focus on the highlighted star. The driver watched in awe as the room filled with a low hum, the sound of power surging through the old machinery. The object's glow intensified, and the hologram shifted, showing a countdown. "The message will be sent in 3 minutes," the voice said. "But you must protect the device until then. The ones who pursue you will try to stop this." As if on cue, the driver heard a noise outside, the sound of car doors slamming. His heart sank. They had found him. He ran to the window and looked out. The black SUV was parked in the lot, and the two figures were approaching the building. They were moving quickly, their faces still hidden in shadow. The driver's mind raced. He had to buy time. He couldn't let them stop the transmission. He looked around the room, searching for something, anything, he could use to defend himself. His eyes landed on a metal rod leaning against the wall. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He grabbed the rod and positioned himself near the door, his heart pounding. The countdown on the hologram was still ticking, 2 minutes left. The door creaked open, and one of the figures stepped inside. The driver swung the rod, catching the figure by surprise and knocking them to the ground. The second figure lunged at him, but he dodged and swung again, this time hitting their arm. The fight was chaotic, the room filled with the sounds of grunts and clashing metal. The driver fought with everything he had, but the figures were strong and determined. They managed to knock the rod out of his hands and pinned him against the wall. One of them reached for the object on the control panel, but the driver kicked out, knocking them back. He scrambled to his feet and grabbed the object, holding it tightly. The countdown was down to 30 seconds. The figures were regrouping, ready to attack again. The driver knew he couldn't hold them off much longer. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Please, let this work." As the countdown reached 0, the room was filled with a blinding light. The figures shielded their eyes, stumbling back. The driver felt a surge of energy, and then everything went silent. When he opened his eyes, the figures were gone. The room was dark again, the control panel lifeless. The object in his hand was still glowing, but the patterns on its surface were calm now. The voice returned, softer than before. "The message has been sent," it said. "You have done well. But this is only the beginning. The darkness is coming, and you must be ready." The driver slumped against the wall, exhausted but relieved. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: he wasn't alone. The object, the Illyrians, they were with him. And together, they would face whatever was coming. The driver sat in the observatory for a long time, catching his breath and trying to process everything that had happened. The object in his hand was still glowing softly, its warmth a comforting presence. He knew he couldn't stay here, the mysterious figures might return, and he needed to figure out his next move. He climbed back into his truck and drove down the hill, his mind racing. The voice had said the message had been sent, but what did that mean? Had anyone received it? And what was he supposed to do now? As he drove, he realized he couldn't do this alone. He needed help, someone he could trust. There was only one person he could think of, his old friend, a retired engineer who had always been good with technology. If anyone could help him understand the object and its purpose, it was him. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number, his hands still shaking. After a few rings, his friend answered. "Hey, it's me," the driver said. "I need your help. It's complicated. Can I come over?" There was a pause on the other end, then a reply. "Of course. I'll be here." The driver drove to his friend's house, a small, cozy place on the edge of town. When he arrived, his friend was waiting at the door, looking concerned. "You look like you've been through hell," his friend said. "What's going on?" The driver hesitated, then held up the object. "I found this. Anne. I think it's from another world." His friend raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. He just stepped aside and gestured for the driver to come in. They sat in the living room, and the driver told his friend everything: the dumpster, the hologram, the Illyrians, the chase, and the observatory. His friend listened quietly, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When the driver finished, his friend leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. "This is incredible," he said finally. "If what you're saying is true, this could change everything." "I know," the driver said. "But I don't know what to do next." The voice said the darkness is coming, and we need to be ready. "But how?" His friend stood up and began pacing the room. "First, we need to understand this device," he said. "If it's a key, like they said, then it must have some kind of function we can use. Let me take a look at it." The driver handed him the object, and his friend examined it closely. He pulled out a magnifying glass and studied the patterns on its surface, muttering to himself as he worked. After a while, he looked up, his eyes wide with excitement. "This is incredible," he said. "The patterns aren't just decorative, they're some kind of code. And the material, it's like nothing I've ever seen before. It's not just advanced technology, it's alien." The driver felt a surge of hope. "Can you figure out how it works?" His friend nodded. "I think so. But it's going to take some time. We'll need to set up a workspace, gather some tools, and we'll need to be careful. If those people who were chasing you find out where you are, they'll come after us." The driver's heart sank. He hadn't thought about that. "What should we do?" His friend thought for a moment, then said, "We'll set up in the basement. It's secure, and no one will know we're there. But we'll need to move fast. If this darkness is really coming, we don't have much time." They spent the next few hours setting up a makeshift lab in the basement. The driver's friend brought down tools, a computer, and a small generator, while the driver kept watch, his nerves on edge. Every sound made him jump, every shadow made him wonder if they were being watched. Finally, they were ready. The object was placed on a workbench, its glow illuminating the room. The driver's friend connected it to the computer and began running tests, his fingers flying over the keyboard. As they worked, the driver felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time since this whole thing started, he didn't feel alone. He had someone to share the burden with, someone who could help him make sense of it all. After a while, his friend looked up, his face serious. "I think I've figured it out," he said. "This device isn't just a key, it's a beacon. It's designed to send a signal, but not just to the stars. It can also activate something here on Earth." The driver frowned. "Activate what?" His friend hesitated, then said, "I'm not sure. But based on the data, it's pointing to a location, a place deep underground. There's something there, something powerful. And if we can activate it, it might be our best chance to stop the darkness." The driver felt a mix of excitement and fear. "Where is it?" His friend pulled up a map on the computer and pointed to a spot. "Here. It's an old military base, abandoned for decades. But if this is right, there's something hidden there, something the Illyrians left behind." The driver stared at the map, his mind racing. This was it, the next step in the mission. But it wouldn't be easy. The base was miles away, and they had no idea what they would find there. "We'll need to move fast," his friend said. "And we'll need to be prepared for anything." The driver nodded, determination filling his chest. "Let's do it." The drive to the abandoned military base was tense. The driver and his friend sat in silence, the object glowing softly on the dashboard. The map on the computer had led them to a remote area, far from any towns or cities. The road was rough, and the truck bounced over potholes and cracks, the headlights cutting through the darkness. As they approached the base, the driver felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. The place looked eerie, even from a distance. The fence was broken and rusted, and the buildings were crumbling, their windows shattered. A sign near the entrance read, "Restricted Area, no trespassing," but the words were faded, barely visible. They parked the truck near the gate and climbed out, the object in the driver's hand. His friend carried a backpack filled with tools and supplies, his face set in a determined expression. "Stay close," the driver said. "We don't know what's in there." They made their way through the broken fence and into the base. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the ground was littered with debris. The driver's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing empty buildings and rusted machinery. It felt like a ghost town, frozen in time. The object began to glow brighter as they moved deeper into the base, its patterns shifting rapidly. "It's reacting to something," the driver's friend said. "We must be getting close." They followed the object's guidance, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Finally, they reached a large, metal door set into the ground. It was covered in rust, but the handle was still intact. The driver grabbed it and pulled, but the door didn't budge. "Let me try," his friend said. He pulled out a crowbar from his backpack and wedged it into the gap between the door and the ground. With a loud creak, the door began to move. They pushed it open, revealing a set of stairs leading down into the darkness. The driver hesitated, his heart pounding. "You sure about this?" he asked. His friend nodded. "We don't have a choice. This is where the device is leading us." They descended the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, they found themselves in a large, underground chamber. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols, similar to the ones on the object. In the center of the room was a massive machine, its surface covered in the same shifting patterns. The driver's eyes widened. "What is this?" His friend walked over to the machine, examining it closely. "It's some kind of generator," he said. "But it's not like anything I've ever seen. It's alien." The object in the driver's hand began to glow even brighter, its patterns moving faster. Suddenly, it projected a hologram, a diagram of the machine, with instructions on how to activate it. "It's showing us what to do," the driver said. "We need to connect the device to the machine." His friend nodded and began working, following the instructions on the hologram. The driver kept watch, his flashlight scanning the room. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. As his friend connected the object to the machine, the room filled with a low hum. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, and the machine came to life, its surface pulsing with light. "It's working," his friend said, his voice filled with awe. "This thing is incredible." But before they could celebrate, they heard a noise behind them. The driver spun around, his flashlight illuminating the figures standing in the doorway. It was the same men who had been chasing him, dressed in black, their faces hidden in shadow. One of them stepped forward, his voice cold and menacing. "Step away from the machine," he said. "You don't know what you're dealing with." The driver's heart raced. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What do you want?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, he raised a weapon, its barrel glowing with a strange, blue light. "This doesn't concern you," he said. "Hand over the device, and we'll let you live." The driver clenched his fists, his mind racing. He couldn't let them take the object, not after everything he'd been through. He glanced at his friend, who gave him a small nod. They were in this together. "No," the driver said firmly. "This isn't yours to take." The figure's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake." Before the driver could react, the figure fired the weapon. A beam of blue light shot across the room, narrowly missing him and hitting the wall behind him. The driver ducked behind the machine, his heart pounding. His friend grabbed a wrench from his backpack and threw it at the figures, hitting one of them in the shoulder. They stumbled back, giving the driver and his friend a chance to move. "We need to activate the machine," his friend shouted. "It's our only chance." The driver nodded and reached for the object, which was still connected to the machine. He pressed his hand against it, and the patterns on its surface began to swirl faster. The machine's hum grew louder, and the room filled with a blinding light. The figures shielded their eyes, stumbling back. The driver felt a surge of energy, and then everything went silent. When the light faded, the figures were gone. The room was dark again, the machine silent. The object in the driver's hand was still glowing, but the patterns on its surface were calm now. The driver's friend let out a breath. "What just happened?" The driver shook his head, his mind reeling. "I don't know. But I think we did it." The driver and his friend stood in the underground chamber, the air thick with tension. The machine was silent now, its surface still pulsing faintly with light. The object in the driver's hand was glowing softly, its patterns shifting slowly, as if waiting for the next step. "What do we do now?" the driver asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His friend examined the machine, his face serious. "The device activated it, but I think there's more to it. Look here." He pointed to a panel on the side of the machine, where a series of symbols were glowing. "These look like controls. Maybe we need to input something." The driver held up the object, and it projected a hologram, a sequence of symbols that matched the ones on the machine. "It's giving us instructions," he said. "We need to enter this sequence." His friend nodded and began pressing the symbols on the panel, following the hologram's guidance. As he worked, the machine began to hum again, the light growing brighter. The room filled with a low, vibrating sound, like the deep rumble of an engine. The driver felt a surge of hope. "It's working," he said. "We're so close." But just as the machine reached full power, the ground beneath them began to shake. The walls of the chamber trembled, and dust fell from the ceiling. The driver's eyes widened. "What's happening?" His friend looked around, his face pale. I don't know. But I don't think it's supposed to do this. The shaking grew stronger, and the machine's hum turned into a deafening roar. The driver grabbed his friend's arm. We need to get out of here. They turned to run, but before they could reach the stairs, the machine exploded in a burst of light. The force knocked them off their feet, sending them crashing to the ground. The driver's ears rang, and his vision blurred as he struggled to get up. When the light faded, the machine was gone. In its place was a swirling portal, its surface shimmering like liquid silver. The driver stared at it, his heart pounding. What is that? His friend shook his head, his eyes wide with awe. I think it's a gateway. A way to somewhere else. The driver felt a mix of fear and curiosity. Where does it lead? Before his friend could answer, the object in the driver's hand began to glow brighter. It projected another hologram, a message from the Illyrians. The gateway is open, the voice said. You must go through. The darkness is near, and only you can stop it. The driver's heart sank. Go through? But, how? What's on the other side? The voice didn't answer. The hologram faded, leaving them in silence. The driver looked at his friend, who was still staring at the portal. We can't just go through that, he said. We don't know what's on the other side. It could be dangerous. His friend nodded, but his expression was determined. We don't have a choice. If the Illyrians are right, the darkness is coming. And if we don't stop it, it'll destroy everything. The driver took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He knew his friend was right. They had come too far to turn back now. But the thought of stepping into the unknown was terrifying. Okay, he said finally. But we stick together. No matter what happens, we face it together. His friend nodded. Together. They approached the portal, the object's glow lighting their way. The surface of the portal shimmered, reflecting their faces like a mirror. The driver reached out, his hand trembling as he touched the surface. It felt cool and smooth, like water. He took a deep breath and stepped through. The world around him shifted, the underground chamber disappearing in a blur of light and color. For a moment, he felt weightless, like he was floating. Then his feet hit solid ground, and the light faded. He looked around, his heart racing. He was standing in a vast, open space, the sky above a deep, swirling purple. The ground beneath his feet was smooth and metallic, like the chamber they had just left. In the distance, he could see strange structures, towers and spires that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. His friend appeared beside him, his eyes wide with wonder. Where are we? The driver shook his head. I don't know. But I think we're on their world. As they stood there, the object in the driver's hand began to glow brighter. It projected a hologram, a map of the area, with a path leading to one of the towers. We need to go there, the driver said. That's where the darkness is. His friend nodded, his face serious. Let's move. They followed the path, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The air was thick with a strange energy, and the sky above swirled with colors that seemed to shift and change. The driver felt a mix of awe and fear as they approached the tower. When they reached the base, they found a door, its surface covered in the same shifting patterns as the object. The driver held up the device, and the door slid open, revealing a dark, narrow passage. They stepped inside, the object's glow lighting their way. The passage led to a large, circular room, its walls lined with glowing symbols. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it was a small, glowing orb, similar to the object, but larger. The driver felt a surge of recognition. This is it, he said. This is what we need to stop the darkness. But before they could approach the pedestal, the room began to shake. The walls trembled, and the symbols flickered. The driver's heart raced as a deep, rumbling voice filled the air. "You are too late," the voice said. "The darkness is here."